Awesome. And we will stop recording right before the Q&A, so the Q&A will not be recorded. Without further ado, I wanted to welcome Dr. Suchitra Gururaj, a practitioner scholar of community engagement and its intersections with diversity, equity, inclusion, and municipal affairs. Dr. Gururaj sat on the leadership team of the beloved Division of Diversity and Community Engagement at the University of Texas, Austin for 15 years, where she most recently served as Assistant Vice President for Community Engagement and led the Center for Community Engagement. In these roles, she was charged with the strategic vision, programming, and assessment around student, faculty, and community-facing programming and stewardship. She continues to serve as a clinical assistant professor in UT's College of Liberal Arts, where her teaching and research focuses on service learning outcomes, university community partnerships, and social inclusion policies in higher ed. Her research has been published in many of our premier publications in the field. She has so many. I'm just going to highlight two. She's the co-editor of two volumes, Exploring Equitable Campus Community Relationships, which is the focus of our webinar today. And also, so exciting, the upcoming Navigating Dynamic Campus Community Relationships, How Universities and Colleges Engage with Demographic Shift, which is slated to be published at the end of this year. So hopefully Dr. Gururaj will come back and be with us for a future Lunch and Learn. Dr. Gururaj has served on many boards in Austin, including the Austin Economic Development Corporation, Community Advancement Network of Austin, Austin Asian Community Civic Coalition, and so many in the field. And I'm just going to highlight a few. The Commission of Economic and Community Engagement of the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities, and for many of you at research institutions, beloved Truckin at Campus Compact, the Research University Civic Engagement Network. I've had the pleasure of serving with Suchi on the editorial board of the Michigan Journal for Community Service Learning, where I got to really witness her care with scholar practitioner research and really pushing the field to be more critical and inclusive with our work. Dr. Gururaj earned her BA in English Lit from Yale University, her MA in English from the University of Chicago, and her PhD in Ed Admin from the University of Texas at Austin. Suchi is a prolific scholar and leader in the field, and we are delighted to have her share her work on her recent co-edited book, Exploring Equitable Campus or Equitable Community Campus Relationships. So I'll turn it over to you, Suchi.
Thank you, Dr. Yamamura. Erica, that was incredibly nice of you to read all of that. Um, I'm struck also by two facts. This call has mentors of mine on it, including Lynn Blanchard. And so it's wonderful to hear all of that. And I'm reminded that none of that would have come to be without advice from wonderful people. The other thing all of you all should know is that Dr. Y, Erica, and I have been sort of in the same social academic circles for a long, long time. And it is a thrill to actually be able to, in the past 2 years, be able to work with you. So thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. It's a thrill to meet all of you and to see familiar faces. Um, so I will start by sharing a presentation. And my hope is that we'll be talking through this presentation, but my hope is that I will be able to follow the chat, or somebody will tell me, or you will unmute yourself and just yell out something that everybody needs to hear, because this doesn't need to be me talking about this book. It needs to be about why this book is important to us as practitioner scholars, as scholar practitioners, as a sector. But I will start with slides. And not sure that worked. So let me try again. How's that? Good? Okay, perfect. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about uh, I think exciting new co-edited volume called Exploring Equitable Community Campus Relationships. I am one of 5 co-editors. And my other co-editors will talk a little bit about this process. I hope that during this conversation, we can also talk about co-editing a volume and the ways that we contribute in this way as scholars to our field as well. But our other co-editors are Dr. Carla Bird at the University of Montana, Dr. Sarah Moore at Salem State, Dr. Andrea Robles, who is with AmeriCorps, and Dr. Cindy Vinson, who is now with BU, Boston University. And so this is a volume that came about from about 2023 to 2024, the production of it. And I want to talk a little bit about the volume is co-published by Routledge, AAC&U, and Campus Compact. It is about equitable partnership building and the work that goes into building those relationships around teaching, research, and practice. We'll talk a bit about the sections of the book as well. It is my responsibility to give you this 20% discount code up top. Anybody who's written a book knows that this is where we start. But I'm curious and I'm hopeful that some of the things that we talk about today will resonate for any of you to think about incorporating in your classes or your student organizations or any of the work that you do as well. So, before we even start with this conversation about the book itself, I want to talk about how it came about. And I want to talk about this because um, we all know we're in a very difficult moment in higher education. Erica mentioned in my bio that I was the inaugural Assistant Vice President for Community Engagement at the University of Texas at Austin. My role ended in May. And we can talk a little bit more about why some of these roles are being discontinued, eliminated at these universities during the question and answer or through the chat or whatever. But this is why I wanted to start with the why behind this volume. So briefly, Erica was kind enough to say, my purview was student-facing programs, faculty-facing programs, but I also had a community-facing portfolio. So we always had a place in the community. We called it our front porch, and that was the place in the community that was meant to welcome community members onto our behemoth campus. And so we did from 2007. I was part of the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement, the beloved Division of Diversity and Community Engagement, which took units from student affairs, academic affairs, external affairs, and combined them toward creating a robust and sort of comprehensive space for diversity, equity, inclusion, and community engagement programs and their intersections. So we did a lot of what we do, connecting faculty with community, for instance. So we had faculty go out into the community and give talks, for instance. What we learned very quickly was that our faculty were doing what faculty do, and faculty are meant to teach, but they were going out into the community and teaching. And community members caught this and said, you don't have to teach us what's going on. We're living this experience, right? So what we wanted to do was sort of move away from the sage on the stage model of community relations, community engagement. And over time, we developed what we called the front porch gathering. So the front porch gathering, many of you have heard me talk about this, so I apologize, but I'll just quickly restate. Front porch gathering was an opportunity for stakeholders from around the region, from around the city, students, faculty, community, council people, residents, parents, children, to come together and talk about a wicked, sticky problem in Austin and collaborate on possible solutions. What we decided to do as UT was to host these events. So we did them in public spaces around the region and churches and schools and community centers. And we had a few things that were really important. Number one, people coming in with just their name on their tag, no titles. A data setter, usually a faculty member, whose time was limited and gave sort of information about the issue at hand. Maybe it's housing affordability. Second, a storyteller who told us from the vantage point of the community what it was like to live that issue, what it was like to be gentrified out of a community, for instance. We had a meal. We had sometimes childcare, right? So this was meant to be inclusive, meant to make sure that people could be a part of this conversation. After the level setting about the issue, people would move to table groups and have facilitated conversations. And the questions were, how can you or the sector you represent bring your resources to address this very complicated issue? And it was our job as the university to step back and allow the magic to happen. If help was needed, we would contribute. But otherwise, it was really our providing time and space for people to share their lived experience and their personal expertise, and then seek out whatever they needed from the university. This was happening during 2015, 2016, 2017, and I was invited with my community partners to contribute to a volume called Anti-Racist Community Engagement. So this was sort of a really vibrant time for the scholarship happening in our field. There are 4 principles of anti-racist community engagement that this editorial team developed through conversations over time. And the principle that my co-authors and I contributed to was building a compassionate classroom. And so we said, what about a compassionate classroom that's in the community? This is a wonderful volume, and you all should definitely flip through it. One of the co-editors on this volume was Cindy Vincent, is Cindy Vincent. Cindy Vincent called me in 2023, and she said, I don't know you, but would you like to be part of this editorial team thinking about equity in community engagement? And I said, absolutely. And so what I did was I joined this team. It's 2 of us are administrators, myself and Carla. 2 are faculty, Sarah and Cindy. And Andrea is really more of a practitioner. This was 2023. We thought we knew what we were doing as practitioners and scholars. We thought we knew everything about equity and reciprocity and mutual benefit and all the things that we do as community engagement professionals. It was wonderful to find out that we were not on the same page about a lot of things. We had a lot of the same feelings about things, but we wanted to sort of mine to this one question that we wanted to answer, which was, what do we mean by equitable relationships? What do we mean by equitable engagement? We landed on more and more conversations and tools that we wanted to use. So we thought about Tania Mitchell's, these are all the literatures that we are building as a team, right? Tania Mitchell's 2008 critical service learning. We thought about Cindy Vincent's model of critically engaged civic learning. We thought about the SOFAR method, that's Bringle, Clayton, and Price, I believe. And it's students, organizations, faculty, administrators, and residents working together. And in the end, we learned from each other as well. Dr. Bird gave us such a gift. She is, she does outreach at the University of Montana to tribal communities. And she gave us the 6 R's of Indigenous engagement, which are respect, relationship, representation, relevance, responsibility, and reciprocity. So we had all these new tools and all these new frameworks to think about equitable engagement. So you can imagine by the end of this year, from 2023 to 2024, we had no decisions about what equitable engagement was. Instead, we decided, why don't we just invite the people who contribute to tell us what they think equitable engagement is and give us their definitions through practice. So this was a wonderful start. April 2nd, 2024 came. On April 2nd, 2024, our Division of Diversity and Community Engagement was dissolved, and 60 plus staff members were dismissed from the university. 40 of us remained, about 40. And I bring this up because as we were thinking about equitable community engagement, there was a shift happening, and we've all experienced the shift happening lately. Um, you can imagine the sadness of April 2nd for all of us who spent 15 years in this division. What you don't know is that it was also the most inspiring time I've ever had in a role, because the 20 of us who were senior leaders at that time said, how will we save the web pages before they get scrubbed? How will we save the stories before people don't tell them? How will we archive all the photos and all the awards that we've gleaned? How can we tell the stories of all the students who've had transformative experiences, all the communities that have been built or master planned because of us? So we took all of this information and we archived all of this information. People who had been dismissed from their job spent time to archive this information. And so I bring this up because this is a moment where we're talking about books and volumes and research, but really we're talking about us as a sector and the way we build our knowledge, save our knowledge, share our knowledge with each other. So I hope that we could talk about all of this in that context. And I hope as we're going through this, you'll be thinking about the ways that maybe this volume is relevant to you, especially section 5, which I'm going to concentrate on today. So I'll keep moving on and hope that people will interrupt me when they need to. We're really proud of this volume as it relates to the broad scope of it as well. We have all different types of institutions. Sort of to list them would be to exclude some, but they're the R1s and R2s and the HBCUs, MSIs, tribal colleges, private Catholic, just one in California, by the way. Land grant, small liberal arts, rural. Community types are urban, rural, different communities as well. The disciplines sort of run the gamut, but I'm just showing you this map of our country. There's also one from Alaska and one from Taiwan that just couldn't make the map, the US-centric map here. So I'm really pleased, number one, that we were able to represent, but also that we had 75 institutions want to tell their story. We had to narrow it down to 18. So please continue to tell your story because there are a lot of people who want to tell the story. So this is the overview of the book. We're really going to dig into part 5, the institutionalization of equity as pathway to sustainability. But I did want to tell you and give you the slides so that you are aware of the strategies, the equity strategies that came out of each one of these sections. So part 1, frameworks. The equitable strategies that came out of this were using explicit frameworks, like we talked about, CECL, critical service learning, so far, co-creating place-based knowledge, centering relationship building as both process and outcome. We'll see that, and this relates directly to Erica Yamamura's work about sustaining place-based relationships as well. It's the relationship, not just the outcomes of the relationship. And honoring cultural, disciplinary, and methodological plurality. One beautiful chapter in this section is called Sites of Healing, Sites of Resistance. And it talks about, at the University of Mississippi, students, faculty, organizations, residents coming together to visit places of memory. And in visiting those places of memory and dialoguing about those places of memory and that experience of visiting those places of memory, individuals, before they even start a community-based project, are able to level set with each other about what that place of memory means, that historical site, for instance, what that place means, what it engenders, what it entails, what it symbolizes. And also in the process of doing that, build trust. So I invite you to read this section. Section 2 is values and principles. So this is where we're anchoring engagement in explicit values, building on strengths and assets, asset-based development, asset-based engagement, centering marginalized voices as leaders and co-creators, and sharing decision-making power and authority. The chapter I wanted to have you think about here was actually from Cal State San Marcos, and it's a partnership with the Samoan community at the university. And it's a lovely piece that schematically maps values um, onto the kind of engagement that the university is doing. So thinking about how the university space can map onto concepts like an island, the shoreline, sacred spaces, and connecting spaces. Thinking about that as a framework to offer a performing arts curriculum that allows for belonging of Samoan students. It's a really lovely piece. Authentic relationships, some of the equitable strategies that we identified was moving beyond the performative to transformative co-creation, using co-design as a primary engagement method, adopting community-controlled and co-production approaches, and differentiating grassroots from grass tops approaches. And that's a expression developed by the Detroit team, thinking about environmental justice in Detroit. But a wonderful example of a chapter in this section is from UC Santa Cruz, in which the Environmental Justice Youth Leadership Academy brings together undergrads and youth from predominantly Latinx farm worker communities to co-create environmental justice rooted in the lived experience of community. So in that way, co-designing, co-producing, co-creating, and ensuring that our partners are equal, equitable partners. Section 4 outlines tensions and obstacles. And so, as you can imagine, everybody in this section treated tensions and obstacles as learning opportunities. So we have a theme throughout about co-design, co-preparation, co-construction, but also this idea that everything that we do as practitioners and scholars is iterative. That we knew, for instance, at UT, that the Sage on the Stage model needed to be updated for something better. And we didn't know what that better was, but we knew we needed to iterate on it. Confronting historical harms directly but thoughtfully, centering community authority when histories are fraught. That is so important for so many of our institutions, where communities around us, for instance, our East Austin community, had so much distrust of our institutions, right? How do we address that in our daily practice? And building university systems that can adapt to community realities. So wonderful. And we've talked about this at length too. A wonderful chapter here is the documenting by folks at the University of Central Arkansas of Chinese American immigrants' experiences in the Arkansas Delta. And this is using the practice of oral histories. But this is where we're going to live for a little while, and I hope that you will feel free to have a conversation with me about this. I feel particularly close to this section also because this was the section that I actually immersed in as an editor. Um, and I think the institutionalization piece is so critical at this moment in higher ed and in all of our work. So in this section, we concentrated on how practitioners and community partners maximize resources. That's the people, places, policies, infrastructure to create sustained partnerships centering equity. And so, like we talked about in this complicated moment in higher education, this piece around institutionalization is more important than ever because it represents the institution's commitment to community. Um, but we need to really think about what that means for each institution. Um, what we mean as editors is community engagement is mission critical work. It is at the center of everything that happens at the university or the college or the institution. That it is, in the words of John Saltmarsh, Matthew Hartley, the idea of deep, pervasive, and integrated, that it's not an add-on, that we don't just think of it as external relations or community relations. Um, and I believe these are things that this group knows very, very well, but that perhaps we need to restate again and again. This idea that we're signaling long-term commitments to community partners. And how do we signal that? Well, throughout the volume, there are chapters about the constraints of higher education. So how do we signal long-term commitment when we are beholden to academic calendars and semesters and grant funding and political regimes, right? So these are all things that we need to think about in institutionalizing. And then, of course, creating multiple access points for partnership. We talked about the front porch of the university, but then there are other formal and informal methods of creating those access points, whether it's for K through 12 or for researchers, whether it's through MOUs or through service tracking tools, for instance. So I'm going to spend a little time on each of the chapters in this lovely section. There are three of them. The first one that I'll talk about is Field Experience in a Third Space by Jen Shaw, Jan Fitzsimmons, Amy Logan, and Brian Spachalski. They're all at North Central College in the Midwest, Chicagoland area. And this chapter is about something that we sort of were really fascinated by because so much of our community engagement work starts in sort of the K through 12 space. And this was a chapter talking about teacher trainers. It was thinking about incorporating a third space where teachers can be trained outside of schools and outside of the institution. It started as a necessity. COVID shut down K through 12 schools. This group went to community-based organizations to have their novice teachers trained. What they found was positive enough where novice teachers felt at home in these community-based organizations, such that this group used some small grant funding to continue to work on the development of third spaces. What they found was that there was a diversity of students in a third space because they weren't attached to one school. What they found was that novice teachers got to spend some time with parents before and after school, which they never would have been able to do if they were at their K through 12 organization. And what they found was that novice teachers, most importantly, felt more confident in a third space, as opposed to sort of in the power structure of the higher ed institution or the power structure of the K through 12 institution. And so they have institutionalized this idea of doing something in a third space that they had always done in a K through 12 setting. The most important thing to remember about this chapter is that they didn't have to do it. Again, this was totally an iteration on something that was already successful, but they saw a better way to do this engagement work. Another chapter in this section is by a group from National Cheng Kung University in Taiwan, and it is about the community engagement with a rural area near the university. And it's a gorgeous chapter about a 10-year relationship with a rural community outside of the university, where the first part of the relationship is just developing the relationship and developing trust. The second part is creating institutional commitment through university social responsibility, programming, and agreement to develop a local pipeline and economic development. And the third part is the creation of what they call a learning region. So instead of creating this spot where people parachute in and do research and parachute out, they created a space where they've all agreed it's going to be a learning region. But guess what? The community's in on it. And the community said, we would like this too. The most important piece for me of this chapter is that the uh, researchers, or actually the collective, chose dissemination of research as one of the most important values of the work that they're doing. So there is no question that knowledge will be hoarded by the institution. It's going to be shared widely, and it's going to be put to use for the development of workforce in a rural area that was experiencing depopulation. The final chapter in this section comes out of Dominican University, and we have Julia Vanderven and Emily Wu to actually give us, if you guys could give us sort of the, Emily and Julia, if you would give that 2-minute overview of sort of what I just said about like why you came up with this or where this partnership came from, who initiated it, and also what you think the most important piece of your learning is around building an equitable relationship to teach this group. I invite you to join us. Thank you guys for being here.
Well, thank you for having us, but that's very challenging to sum up in 2 minutes. I can say that, I mean, our chapter focus is specifically on our partnership with the local Latino immigrant community, about 10 minutes from campus. And the largest nonprofit that serves that community is Canal Alliance. And actually, their Omar Carrera is our co-author, and he runs that organization. And also Voces del Canal is the grassroots community group that kind of grew out of the initial project. So honestly, we're charting this partnership starting with our participatory action research project, which we started in 2012. And then through a series of what we're calling transformative moments that were actually not moments, but really extended periods of time, including the 2-year PAR project, and then our learnings through the pandemic and the co-creation of programming that we did that taught us so much, and then into our MOU. I can say, I'll just pass it to Emily. I think our greatest learning is that I struggle with actually the concept of institutionalization, because I think that the institutions are kind of the problem in many ways, and that the community should transform the institution. So that's been our goal is how can what the community, what how community defines equity, what the community knows, how can that actually transform the way our institution functions? That's the idealistic goal. Emily, you want to add on?
I want to tag on the ongoing conversation about institutionalization as exactly what we don't do very well with this. I mean, formalization of our partnership and relationship is what we focus on because and mostly because, it's as long as different parties could leverage that to get to their different goals. I mean, that would be ideal. But I mean, Julia and I, we sit and a lot of times we're like, and when we got this chapter in, it felt even more unsettled. And then as it becomes published, we it's like, wait, and just the fact that institutions and relationships and politics continue to move and organizations grow and they flex. And so, every couple of months we feel like we're in a different place. And so, I feel like our chapter documented some very important phases of this relationship dating back to Julia's, 20-year relationship with Omar, who's very grassroots, and went really, really up the leadership hierarchy from the very bottom, to then, Lucia Leon, who can't be with us today, but, she really was crucial in holding a multi-stakeholder project together with our students, supporting that really documenting those moments or when our students really step up and, co-created with our support the projects throughout the pandemic to support parent digital literacy or to, support the rental assistance programming in the county. These are important moments when everybody's really invested and really forgot about institutionalization, but really focused on what exactly does the community need. And I would say, a lot of times minimally about the politics because, it's like the needs are so crucial. But then who are we to tell other people what institutionalization means when I'm honestly, we don't know if our institutions have total buy-in into these. So that would be my two.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I think you hit on everything that is difficult about this. I think what is exciting, thank you, Julia. Thank you, Emily. What is exciting about what Dominican has done is created that MOU and sort of established this formal connection. But I was also just really, really impressed by the longevity of this relationship and the fact that there were personal relationships happening beyond the partnership itself. So, one of the things, what I don't know if this is an exact quote, but this is what I always think of when I think of your chapter. All were transformed by this work. All were transformed by this work. Equity is the mutual transformation of identities through this process. So I just very much appreciated that from this chapter as well. Thank you guys. So, what I'll leave us with, well, some of the themes that we saw were these iterative processes, this focus on outcomes and process. So, exactly what Emily and Julie were talking about. It may not be the institutionalization, it may be the institutional knowledge. And Erica, you and I were talking about this. There are folks at these institutions with institutional knowledge. And so, how do we focus on the process as well as the outcomes? Sustain trust over time. And then relationships, relationships, relationships. That's everything. And that's what we read through this entire volume. Briefly looking forward, our editorial team for exploring equitable community campus relationships really thought about what are other new ways of knowing that maybe we don't get to share as much. How can Lead California sort of share these new ways of knowing, or the Michigan Journal, or how do we change our processes so we're always sort of sharing new ways of knowing? How did I only just now learn about the 6 ours of Indigenous research, right? Um, and we thought about shared commitments, evaluating our motivations. Are we doing public relations or are we thinking about public purpose? Are we trying to help our students or are we trying to help our students with community? Redefining expertise. That's what we did in the front porch gatherings. That's what all of our authors did in writing and pursuing their projects and writing their chapters. Compensation of community leadership came up throughout this volume. How do we compensate folks? Is it through stipends? Is it through credit? I kept noting, and Emily, you know this, that you are a W in the alphabet, but you were the last author on your chapter, and I thought that was so cool to give community partners first authorship, sustaining partnerships. How do we sustain those partnerships over time? How do we build in dialogue and reflection and transparent communication to sustain those partnerships? And of course, listening. We think about understanding our context. Like we had 75 different stories, despite all being in the same higher education sector. And then we had 18 that we sort of landed on. So we all have very unique contexts, very unique histories that we have to learn about. However, can we also come together and advocate for our sector? So at this moment, I feel very lucky to be able to help Campus Compact. We're sort of talking through this idea of making a case for a chief engagement officer. Does every institution need to have a chief engagement officer? And what does that mean? And what would that look like? And why would it be there? And who would fund it? Right? And so, how do we come together and say, yeah, this is important enough that we should all be thinking about this? And then P.S. I don't know. I know that Tim Stanton was also maybe on this call. I can't see everybody. Lynn is definitely on this call. And I think of folks as founders, as mentors to those of us who are still coming up in the field. There's always been a literature that has allowed us to share this work. And the truth is, just like you said, Emily, as we head into, promoting this book, some of this stuff is already outdated. Some of the stuff that I will be publishing in our Navigating Dynamic Community Campus Relationships with Brianna Johnson is also outdated. But we must sort of think about ourselves as building this field, as legitimizing the field through all of these pieces of work. Blanchard and Furco, that's famous piece of literature. But there are new books by Byron White about public purposes of higher education. Lena Dostilio writing about community engagement professionals. Like I said, Brianna and I have a book coming out this fall. And Erica and Kent have their second volume on place-based engagement. We continue to build this literature, and it should all be speaking to each other. So this is just my way of saying we have to continue to tell our stories about how we do this equitable work, save the artifacts, save the knowledge, put the institutional knowledge somewhere, because when we build the libraries again, we will have it all with us. So I'll just stop there and hope that we can have a little discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Suchi and Julia and Emily, for sharing your work. Just make a note there.
Yep.
Suchi and her, can you go back to the slide real quick?
Oh, I could. Yeah.
They have a whole series of different webinars, so I highly encourage you, especially because they focus on the different sections too, if you're interested. So I'm going to stop recording and